Good afternoon and welcome everyone. It is wonderful to have you here. It's also such pleasure to see the room is full of enthusiastic listeners. I'm Tao Wang, Pritzker Chair of Arts of Asia and Executive Director of Initiatives in Asia. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the first program for this exhibition, Opening Day. Today is the opening day. Korean National Treasures, 2,000 Years of Art. The exhibition is curated by Yeonsoo Chee, the Korean Foundation Associate Curator of Korean Art at the Art Institute. Yeonsoo is a vital member of the museum and has steward of all Korean collections since she joined Art Institute in 2019. She has debuted a newly expanded gallery of Korean art and is working to grow the Korean collections. Her most recent exhibition, Korean National Treasures, 2,000 Years of Art, features 140 artworks, including modern and historical paintings, ceramics, and bronzes, and included made for Buddhist worship and scholarly studies. Among them, 22 are officially recognized as national treasure or treasures by the Korean government. This exhibition, drawn from the national bequest of Lee Kun-Hee's collection, the founder of Samsung, is organized by the Art Institute of Chicago, the Smithsonian National Museum of Asian Art, the National Museum of Korea, and the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, Korea. On behalf of all of us at the Art Institute, I want to thank the National Museum of Korea for generously providing lead support for Korean National Treasures exhibition. I'm also grateful to our corporate sponsor, Samsung, and to an anonymous donor for the contributions to this exhibition. Now, please join me in welcome Yeonsoo Chee to the stage. She will give us a deep dive of this very exceptional objects, many masterpieces. Following lecture, Yeonsoo will be joined on stage by Dr. Kim Sunghee, the director of the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, Korea, who will share the insights on the Lee Kun-Hee collection at her museum. Now, please, Yeonsoo. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tao, for welcome and introduction. And I would like to just echo what Tao has just said. It is a really great pleasure to welcome all of you on this very exciting day, the member opening of the Korean National Treasures 2,000 Years of Art. It's the largest exhibition devoted to Korean art in over 4 decades at the Art Institute of Chicago, and by far the most comprehensive presentation of Korean art. So I am very thrilled and honored to be part of this journey and to share the wealth of Korean arts and then the ideas behind this through this exhibition. Since Tao has already given a little bit of introduction to the exhibition, I'll just right in. So, yes, as Tao just mentioned, the exhibition draws from the extraordinary bequest made in 2021 in the name of the late Samsung chairman Lee Kun-Hee. Lee and his wife, Madame Hee, assembled one of the most distinguished private collection of Korean art. Following his passing in 2020, Lee's family donated approximately 23,000 objects to the Korean government, a historic gift that made headlines around the art world, as you can see just a few of the coverages in the media. I began planning this exhibition only months after, actually, the bequest was announced in April 2021, and I contacted the Minister of Korean Culture, Tourism, and Sports in 3 months later in July. So it is really a long time coming to really see the fruition of this project. So I might be a little bit overwhelming as I was speaking. So I began organizing this exhibition because there are just so many interesting and also resounding reasons to organize this exhibition, and then one of which was a powerful story about philanthropy, which resonates so well with our audiences in the United States. So the foundation of this prestigious private collection actually began with Lee's father, the founder of the Samsung Group, Lee Byung-chul. The elder Lee had a passion for calligraphy, as you can see from this dear photograph of him and his son Lee Kun-Hee together. So he began acquiring traditional Korean ink paintings in the late 1950s. It is a time when Korea was still struggling to rebuild after the devastation of the colonial period and Korean War. So it was really visionary that he even thought of acquiring these works to preserve Korean cultural heritage. And Lee Kun-Hee inherited his father's enthusiasm and greatly expanded the family's holdings in scope as well as in size, along with his wife. Much of their growing collection became the foundation for two private museums in Korea, the Hoa Museum of Art, which was founded in 1982, and the Lee Museum of Art, which was designed by three world-renowned architects, Maria Botta, Jean Nouvel, and Rem Koolhaas. I can't even imagine what it would be like inviting three giants and then working on this one single project. I think only Samsung could make that happen. And so moving on to the exhibition, this is the kind of the design that we prepared, and it is actually, as you walk into the gallery, this will be the first two objects that will greet you in the exhibition. So it is a munjar from the 1700s and a modern painting from 1973. Together, they offer a glimpse of what lies ahead, a seamless story of Korean art unfolding from the pre-modern to the modern eras. Inside, the exhibition unfolds across 5 thematic sections, guiding visitors through the core ideas and distinctive beauty of Korean art, such as modernity in Korean painting and a millennium tradition in Korean ceramics. As Tao mentioned, among the 140 works on view, 22 are designated as national treasures and treasures by the Korean government, which inspired the exhibition's title. These objects are distinguished by their exceptional artistic and historical values and are often unique or extremely rare. So please look for these two icons throughout the galleries on the object labels so that you can easily locate those objects and then identify and then have a see for yourself why these objects were designated with such distinctive honors. The opening section, the Lee family as collectors, I introduced the collectors and reflects traditional Korean values and aspirations manifested in the collection. A folding screen of a scholar's accoutrement known as chekkado, as you see here, is a really unique genre that only appears in Korean painting. It exemplifies how scholar officials who were the elite ruling class in the pre-modern era, how they kind of personified their values and their personalities and their aspirations through the belongings and then by documenting those belongings. So, for example, writing implements, books, and then scholarly furnishings symbolize reverence for learning and moral cultivation. Korea accepted Confucianism well before the Joseon Dynasty, probably around the 1st century BC and the 1st century AC, around that time. So Confucianism was really deeply embedded in the Korean society. And then one of the values that Confucian scholars or the Confucius himself kind of emphasized is the learning to be the morally righteous person. So in Korean society, the learning, education takes a great place, and you probably know that already from maybe you have one or two your friends who came to the United States for study. So it is a very common phenomena for families to send their children to the schools that are prestigious internationally so that they can get a better education. So this zeal for education actually is embedded in much earlier time period, maybe 2 millennia, as the exhibition title indicates. So this section really embodies that values embedded in Korean culture. Also depicted in the screen are unique items imported from China, including colorful ceramics and bronzewares like this, as well as fruits, corals, and scarlet rocks. These objects are included for their symbolic associations. So pomegranates symbolize fertility because they contain many seeds, as we know. Corals represent success. And scarlet rock indicate an appreciation of the universe and nature, as well as loyalty, because they never change in their shapes and the properties. So surrounding objects selected from the Lee Kun-Hee collection, as you see here, also demonstrate how these ideals and the values continue to shape collecting practices in modern Korea among the collectors such as the Lee family. Ideals and self-expressions is a section where the paintings from the Joseon dynasty are featured. And it is a section that is especially meaningful to me as it highlights the richness and the diversity of Korean painting on areas still underrepresented in our collection. At its center is a 17th century painting titled Clearing After a Rain on Mount Inwang by Jeongseon, one of the most revered painters in Korean art history. Designated national treasure, this masterful landscape was also the first object acquired by Lee and Madame Lee together. So Jeongseon was among the first literary artists or scholar artists to depict the real landscapes known as Jingyong Sanswa. When many of his contemporaries were painting idealized scenery following the established practice. So he rendered Mount Inang's massive granite peaks with the dark ink, confident downward strokes. It will remain on view until May 11 before rotating it with the work by another celebrated court painter, the Kim Hong-do. So you will have to come back to the exhibition after May 12th to see this painting, and there's another Buddhist painting will be rotated for preserve the painting in a better condition. So if you see this painting without any reference, I think it's really kind of easy to kind of make a statement. It is such an abstract painting. You don't see much of the kind of the mountains that we are so familiar with. But when you look at this painting side by side with the actual photographs of the sites that you hear, you can kind of understand how Jeongseon actually successfully captured the essence and the appearance of the mountain that he grew up with. So he was born under the foot of this mountain, and then he died in the same house. So he really saw this mountain day and night for his over 70 years of the life. So at his very last moment in his life, he decided to capture the beauty of the mountain after summer rain has been cleared. And I think we can, if you go see the exhibition, this work, I think you can see that really kind of a mist coming in between the valleys and the mountains, like soaked with the water. That kind of sentiments really kind of resonates, and then you can get a sense. Another highlight in this section is the 10 symbols of longevity, a vibrantly finished 10 folding screen executed by court painters of the Joseon dynasty. This magnificent painting expresses one of the most enduring and intrinsic human desire, living forever. Its 10 panels depict the kind of lush paradise where Taoist deities were believed to live forever. In many East Asian cultures, 10 is considered the number of completion or perfection. The 10 symbols of longevity also appear in China or Japan. It is not unique to Korea, but this particular composition approach with its insistence on including all 10 symbols is unique to Korea. In fact, despite the title, it says 10 symbols of longevity, there are 12 traditional symbols of longevity are visible in this work. So the first is the sun, sometimes also with the moon, represents the universe, ever-present and then timeless. Mountains and rocks exist more or less unchangingly. The clouds present an atmosphere, which along with the water is another permanent feature of life on Earth. Cranes and clouds would often be painted together as a joint symbol of longevity. The cranes, with their slender necks and then graceful bodies, were considered as a semi-divine creatures, and they often appear in Korean folktales as a mystical creature. And deer, like cranes, they're considered also divine for their majestic antlers and the beautiful looks. And seeing deer as a divine creature actually goes way back to the prehistoric time, and then during the Three Kingdoms period, which started around the 1st century BCE and then lasted until 7th century. In the early time period, the shamans were believed to have the connection with these deer as a divine beings, and then they would often wear the gold crowns that kind of incorporates the deer antlers in their shapes. And then turtles, I guess it doesn't require any explanation. They really live forever, as we know. And then these reddish mushrooms toward the bottom of the painting, Yeonsoo or Lingzi in Chinese, and it is believed to be the key ingredient in the elixir of immortality. Bamboo and pine, they are evergreen, and then peaches are a key feature in the Taoist paradise. Peach trees in Taoist paradise bear fruits in every several hundred years, and if you have a bite of those peaches, you also become an immortal. So peach became a synonymous of the paradise in East Asian culture, and oftentimes the peach blossom spring means the paradise, and in the exhibition we have also 2 other paintings of the same title. So the painters here used the saturated hues rather than blending colors, and then gave many of the objects prominent black outlines, resulting in a flattened pictorial space and a distinctly graphic quality. To achieve such intense colors, the painters applied multiple layers of mineral pigments bound with the animal glue. And the result is a landscape with little sense of reality, is what they longed for was beyond this world. The Buddhist art section features an array of magnificent religious objects from the 6th century through the 19th century. So this section is really I kind of jokingly said, it's the Star Wars. There, almost every other object in this section is designated either national treasure or treasures. And this frontispiece of the sutra titled The Practices and Vows of the Samantabhadra is elegantly rendered in gold pigments dyed on indigo paper. During the Goryeo period, which lasts from 918 to 1392, transcribing sutras or Buddhist scriptures was considered a meritorious act, and royal and aristocratic patronage supported the creation of lavish devotional works such as this one. There are only few copies surviving in the world at the moment, so this is a real treat to see one of these in this exhibition. As I mentioned, this section just includes so many the beautiful works. And then another national treasure in this section is a painting depicting 1,000 armed Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara is a Buddhist bodhisattva or Buddhist deity of compassion. He is sometimes described as having multiple arms and multiple eyes to express his vast ability to see and then also relieve the pains of the sufferings of the lay human beings. It's so darkened, so it is difficult to see, but so we have thankfully the X-rayed the image to show you the little details. I think, I don't know if you can see, but these are the multiple arms holding many different Buddhist ritual objects. And then here you will be able to see the eyes, multiple eyes. So it really surrounds the kind of this halo of the Buddhist deity. This painting will also be rotated in the middle of the exhibition on May 12th. This is a very fragile painting from the 14th century, so it is actually also a little bit darker than the other works in the exhibition because we kind of take extra cautions measures to protect the painting so that it can be shared by many generations after us. And the Lee family are devout Buddhists themselves, so they acquired these objects with a great devotion and then sincerity. But also, many of the objects in the Buddhist section are the objects that they reclaimed, they bought from the art markets outside Korea when a lot of objects and cultural heritage were displaced after the period of the colonial time from 1910 to 45 and the Korean War from 1950 to 53. So these are times that the people were just very desperate to survive in Korean history. So taking care of and then protecting the cultural heritage was not in their priorities. And then there was a lot of outside entities arrived in Korea, and then when they left, they didn't just leave. They unfortunately took many of the cultural heritage illegally. And so now Korea and then a lot of collectors and then institutions in Korea are very actively seeking those illegally replaced cultural heritage. And one particular characteristic that is notable in the Koryo Buddhist painting is the technique of coloration known as peche, meaning it was painted from the back, as you can see from this image. The painters would apply pigments on the back of the silk, and because the silk was thin enough to be transparent, color applied to the back appears softer and more subdued on the front. In general, the areas chosen for back paintings were the exposed flesh and then garments, the large areas, and then the details such as facial features and then motifs on the garments or the jewelries that these deities are wearing will be finished on the front. So as a result, this Buddhist painting really has although it looks very flat, but if you look at it close, there's a beautiful depth and then the richness in pigments. And as the 10 symbols of longevity painting, the Buddhist painters also never mix the pigments. They use only the primary colors, red, blue, and the black, of course. And then how you create this flesh, the color of the flesh. So they will paint the red on the back and then flip the painting, and then on the front side, they paint gold. So the mixing of the red and the gold becomes very close to the human flesh. So these are really kind of jewel-like objects if you look at them in close inspection. And ceramics form another highlight of the exhibition. For centuries, Korean potters developed distinctive and innovative ceramic traditions. Particularly notable is buncheongware that you see here. Buncheong is a uniquely Korean ceramic form, and it refers to a gray stoneware decorated with a white slip that flourished in the 15th and 16th centuries only. The bottle on the right is particularly charming. It's also buncheongware, and it features a delightfully exaggerated fish motif, revealing both technical mastery and a playful freedom of expression unique to Joseon ceramics. Also in the section are beautiful celadon from the 12th and 13th centuries. and strikingly different blue and white wear. This particular example is skillfully decorated with the 3 distinct landscape scenes around the surface, as if you are unfolding a hand scroll painting. One scene at the center shows a pavilion with a fluttering flag up on a mountain, while 2 scenes on the left and right depicts an anchored boat on the right and a drifting small fishing boat to the left. This composition actually comes from a popular Chinese iconography known as the 8 Views of the Xiao and Shang Rivers, a frequent painting theme since the 11th century around East Asia. So if you look at this vase, the scholars who were the most likely the users of these ceramics, they would immediately know what the theme of this painting is and then kind of create a conversation amongst the gatherings of the like-minded. This particular example is skillfully decorated with the very confident brushworks, and then also the gradations that you see on the mountain is particularly skillful. It is very difficult to have that effect using the cobalt blue, the mineral pigments on around the surface that has a concave. So it is not the painting or the skills that everyone has. So it's certain that we can make a certain statement that this was done by a court painter. Actually, during the Joseon Dynasty, there was a kiln that was established by the government office, and it was overseen by the administration. And then also the cobalt blue pigment was very expensive at the time. It was imported from China. It was first imported from Islamic world and then arrived in China, and then the Joseon potters will buy from Chinese the merchants. So that has a kind of 2 layers exports routes, and because it was so came from far and then rare, so not everyone even could afford the blue and white pigments to paint. And on top of that, the skills to execute these excellent paintings only were possessed by the coal painters. So coal painters were often dispatched to the kiln sites to paint these beautiful paintings on the ceramic surface. So the result is what we are looking at here, just very seamless conversation between actually 2D works and then 3D, the porcelain. Another major strength of the Lee Kun-Hee collection is its seamless presentation of a Korean art across time and medium. It includes key works by artists who ushered in modernism during periods of profound upheaval, as I just mentioned, Japanese colonial period and the Korean War. Baek Nam-soon's Paradise vividly captures the complexity of the colonial period. In this painting, Baek, who was one of the very few oil painters at the time, and also who was very few individuals who went to Paris to study without the mediation of Japan, she synthesized East Asian utopian ideals of the peach blossom springs that I just mentioned with the Western concept of paradise. So if you look at this painting side by side with the painting on top, which is a rendition of the peach blossom spring by Roh Si-hyun in more traditional manner, you can see that Baek Nam-soon's paint, the distant mountain peaks and winding waters and waterfalls in Baek Nam-soon's painting clearly evoke Korean ink painting traditions, but also expressive colors and figural elements that you see here reflect Fauvist and expressionist influences that she firsthand observed while she was studying in Paris. So I'm going to pause here and invite Ms. Sunghee Kim, Director of the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art Korea, to unpack the other works in the modern section, and also hear directly from her the impact this Lee Kun-Hee collection had on the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art Korea. So Director Sunghee Kim is a seasoned art professional in Korea for over 35 years. She's been professors, curators, mentors to younger artists, and also advisors to the Korean government to help them establish cultural policies, which has become such an efficient tool to support overseas institutions with the Korean art collections and the Korean art programs. So I have a great deal to thank her. So without further ado, please welcome Director Sunghee Kim to the stage. Hi, is the microphone works fine? Okay, thank you. So, as I mentioned, I am really excited to have a conversation with the Director Sunghee Kim on the Lee Kun-Hee collection and the impact it has on the MMCA's collections and also exhibition programs. So, my first question to Ms. Kim will be in her opinion, as such an experienced art professional, what has been the most significant impact of the Lee Kun-Hee collection on MMCA? So MMCA.
네. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great pleasure to be here. Thank you. But it's very easy for me to speak in Korean, so I want to explain very detailed. So please allow me to speak in Korean and then as an answer. Thank you. 이건 이 컬렉션 영향에 대해서 얘기하셨었죠. 네, 뭐 지금 짧게 제가 정리해서 그냥 말씀드리겠습니다. 첫 번째는 그 미술품 소장 미술관 소장품 중에서 근대 미술 컬렉션의 질과 양이 아주 비약적으로 커졌다는 것입니다. 아시겠지만 근대 미술 작가들은 이미 사망한 작가들이 많기 때문에 수집에 어려움이 있습니다. 그런 점에서 사실 대량의 근대 미술품을 저희가 한꺼번에 소장했다는 것은 연구자나 또 전시의 질과 양에서 큰 영향을 미쳤다고 할 수 있습니다. 또 두 번째는 미술에 대한 일반 대중의 관심도가 대폭 증가했다는 점입니다. 예를 들면 사실 저희가 이제 국립현대미술관에서 기증품 특별전을 몇 차례 개최했었는데 관람객들의 뜨거운 호응이 있었고 이제 그 여러 점에서 볼 때는 이 건희 컬렉션이라는 이름 때문에 미술관을 처음 문을 두드린 그런 관람객들이 굉장히 많이 유입이 됐고 그 관람객들이 꾸준히 미술관 식구가 됐다는 거죠. 관람객이 됐다는 그런 이유에서 대중의 관심도를 이제 높였다 하는 게 두 번째 영향으로 볼 수 있습니다. 그 세 번째는 또 기증에 대한 그 인식의 변화라고 할 수 있습니다. 사실 개인이나 기업이 수집한 컬렉션들, 그러니까 미술품들이 그냥 모든 국민들에게 공개적으로 향유의 기회가 주어졌다는 그런 점에서 그 사실은 그런 기증 문화는 제가 알기로는 서양에서는 굉장히 일반화돼 있고 또 뭐 시카고 미술관도 마찬가지지만 뭐 어느 컬렉션이라는 이름 하에 많은 그 전시실이 공개되어 있는 것으로 알고 있습니다. 사실은 그 국내 한국에서는 그런 그 대규모 기증 사례가 그렇지 많지 않았던 그런 시절에 이런 부분에서 굉장히 그 기증에 대한 긍정적인 영향력이 있었다는 거. 그래서 사실은 그 한국 문화예술의 역량을 진보시키는 데 큰 역할을 했다. 이제 그 점을 이제 세 번째로 들 수 있습니다. 그래서 이런 세 가지의 큰 역량, 그 외에도 사실은 많은 부분들이 있습니다만 짧게 요약해서 말씀드리면 이 세 가지로 말씀드릴 수 있습니다. 네.
So I've tried to summarize, not losing the very important points. So MMCA, as you see in this image, is a huge institution. They have 4 different locations, 2 in Seoul and then 1 in Gwacheon, which is the original location, and then also in Cheongju, which recently opened. And then she did mention to me yesterday that they are actually anticipating the opening of the 5th location. But in spite of that, the institutional scale, collecting the works from the early modern period has not been easy because, as I just mentioned, Korea went through very difficult times in the first half of the 20th century, and then a lot of works were lost, and then artists died during the war. A lot of paintings were burned or destroyed, and then they have to leave them behind while they are fleeing from the war. So it has been very difficult to collect these works, but getting this like a really large amount of collections that's made in the first half of the 20th century has been a real value to the collection and to the institution. So that was her first point. And the second point is that she, since the collection arrived at the MMCA, they have staged many exhibitions at MMCA and also other cities. They were just collaborating the institutions outside Seoul as well. So it drew really a lot of people to the exhibitions and the museums in general. So as you can see in these images, every exhibition just broke the records, and then people were lined up even during the pandemic. And then what she mentioned, is, which really kind of is meaningful to me, is that there are so many first-time visitors to the museum. So there are many people who were not interested in visiting the museum, but then they were just genuinely curious about what this Samsung family has collected. I mean, I think we all have this kind of a curiosities and a voyeurism that what are the rich and famous people are doing. So this collection really brought that curiosity to the general public and then made them their first step to enter the museum. And then since then, they will come back. So I think that is another really tremendously positive impact on the institution. And then third is that she saw the growing kind of interest and then increase donating the collection to the museum. So she mentioned, unlike the United States or Western world, the philanthropy or the idea of giving is not as mature as in Korea. I think it's very understandable that the Korea went through such a difficult times in the first half of the 20th century, and then country was just so busy rebuilding it. So giving to others was never in their minds. They have to feed themselves. They have to live their lives with their children. So now I think Korea is in a much better and an affluent and comfortable space, and also this family, the Samsung family, who is probably the most, the wealthiest and the richest family in Korea, has stepped up and then donated this large amount of collection, setting a really positive model and then precedent to this artwork and then to the general audience. So she really thinks that those three are the most impactful aspects the Lee Kun-Hee collection made to the institution. I hope I did it. I know. Thank you. I know there are many, the audience, we have many audience members today who are bilingual, so I'm very pressured to kind of do my job better. So yes, let's keep up the streak. So my second question is a little more, I think this is a little more personal question to me as I was preparing the exhibition. So that the second question that I want to ask is, what are the works or the artists that she, in her opinion, are the transformative the works in the Korean modern art history? 근현대 미술에서 가장 큰 영향을 준 화가들에 대해서.
세 분 정도로.
예.
뭐 사실은 저희 그 국립현대미술관에서 출품한 작품들을 다 나열하고 싶지만 거기서 이제 한 3작품 정도만 초이스를 했습니다. 그 중에 한 작가가 그러니까 이응로, 이중섭, 김환기 3작가를 선택할 수 있었는데요. 이응로 작가는 사실 총 55점이 기증이 됐고, 그래서 전 시기의 작품이 골고루 기증이 됐습니다. 그래서 연구 자료로 매우 귀중한 그런 계기가 됐고요. 이응로 작가 선생님은 굉장히 독특한 이력을 갖고 계십니다. 워낙 한국에서 전통 동양화, 한국 서화를 배우셨고요. 그다음에 30대 때 일본으로 가게 됩니다. 그래서 일본의 전통 채색, 그러니까 전통 회화를 거기서 배웠고, 그다음에 58년에 프랑스로 이주한 후에는 아마 굉장히 많은 고민을 하셨을 것 같습니다. 그래서 서구의 앵포르멜과 동양화, 한국화를 접목한 새로운 세계를 연구하기 시작을 하셨고요. 그래서 수목추상 그리고 콜라주로 독자적인 작품 세계를 구축하셨습니다. 그래서 이후에는 문자추상으로 아주 유명한 작가가 되셨고요. 그리고 또 이를 더 발전시킨 군상, 아마 이 군상 작품이 이번에 출품됐습니다. 여러분 보시면 금방 알아보실 수 있을 겁니다. 그래서 이런 그 한국 미술사, 근대 미술사에서 중요한 위치의 작가입니다. 먼저 네.
So she would like to mention all of the artists in the Lee collection, but because we are crunched with time, she selected 3 artists generously. So first artist is Lee Young-no, as you see here. He's a really interesting artist, both in his artistic career and also biography. So he went to Japan in 1930s and studied Japanese painting, so-called Nihonga. So he learned vibrant the Nihonga painting, but also before that he was trained as a traditional ink painter. And then he went to France in 1958, he went to France. So there, he actually became even more interesting in his kind of compositions, the working with these characters and calligraphy, and then merging with the French informal, and then create these beautiful the compositions. And also, he created a lot of works that utilize collage technique. But I think the one work that she also would like to point out is the work that is in our own exhibition. If you have seen it already, it is great. If you haven't, please go see the work after this talk. So this is a work that he really combines East Asian calligraphic tradition with the abstraction and then layering the meanings. I think this one really resonates well with the contemporary audience. We do not leave. I mean, I think this is the thing that she has previously kind of sent her notes to me. So I'm just gonna kind of implement that parts. She did said this work really kind of sends the messages that we are only able to kind of harmoniously prosper when we work together. So there's that very poignant meaning behind this work. So I thought I would just add that she only shared with me, but I'm adding that to you.
네, 다음 작가입니다. 이중섭 작가인데요. 아마 이중섭 선생님은 엽서화, 편지화, 그리고 굉장히 작은 작품을 하신 작가로 유명합니다. 그 엽서와 편지화 포함해서 총 100여 점이 기증됐습니다. 저희로서는 사실 별도의 전시의 분량만큼이나 확보한 셈이 됐죠. 그래서 사실은 이 이중섭 전은 지금 한국의 지역 미술관의 순회전도 기획돼 있습니다. 특히 그가 한국인으로서의 정체성을 투영시킨 소재를 다뤘죠. 황소입니다. 그렇게 농민 생활이 위주였던 한국에서는 이 소가 주는 그 느낌, 또 소에 대한 개념은 굉장히 국민들 사이에서 뜻깊은 의미가 있습니다. 그래서 이 황소를 그린 유화가 2점이나 저희가 확보가 됐고요. 그다음에 대중적으로 큰 인기를 누리고 이게 이 컬렉션의 아마 하이라이트라고도 할 수 있는 작품의 한 점이 이번에 출품이 됐고요. 아마 국민화가로서 아마 여기 지금 한국 분들도 좀 계시는 걸로 제가 알고 있는데 아마 더 큰 호응도 얻을 수 있지 않았을까 싶습니다.
So second artist that she mentioned is Lee Jung-sub. He is actually a very dear artist to me because I wrote my master's thesis on him, so I might go a little overboard. So he's an artist with a tremendous talents, and in the collection there were 100 works were included. There are a lot of he lived such a difficult time, so he created very small works like postcards, and then the works that he created on the wrappers of the cigarettes. So those works really adds a lot of great depth to the MMCA collection, and then there's been the many exhibitions featuring his work. And the subject matters that he chose to draw also resonate very well with the Korean audiences, especially his bull paintings. So he is known as the painter of a bull, and because the bull has been such cow or ox has been a very dear animal to many Koreans, because Korea in traditional society was an agrarian society. So agriculture, when you do farming, the cows are the most precious asset. They do works for you, and then also they live very precious diet for us. So the cowskin has been a really dear animal to the Koreans. So I think the Lee Jung-seo painted cow for many different reasons. And in the collection, there are 2 oil paintings of cows, the bulls, and then this ox painting or bull painting is probably one of the highlights in the entire Igoni collection that was donated to the MMCA. And this has been a very popular the work among the visitors in Korea, and she's sure that this will also well resonate with our audiences in Chicago.
네, 마지막 작가입니다. 한국 근현대를 통틀어서 추상미술의 대표 작가입니다. 김한기 작가 작품을 들 수 있습니다. 단 3점입니다. 컬렉션, 저희가 기증받은 컬렉션은. 그러나 이게 우선 크기로부터 굉장히 큰 사이즈의 작품이고요. 이 작가의 대표적인 작품들입니다. 그래서 그런 큰 의미가 있습니다. 이번에 출품된 산울림 1973년, 저희 아마 이번 전시의 표지 작가이기도 합니다. 저희도 지금 한국 국립현대미술관에서도 상설전의 대표 작품으로 저희가 선보이고 있다가 이 시카고의 중요한 미술관에서 전시가 있기 때문에 저희가 이제 다른 작품으로 교체를 했는데요. 이 작품은 뉴욕에서 체류하던 말년에 제작된 작품이고, 이게 유화이지만 동양화나 한국화에서 느껴지는 수묵의 번짐 효과, 종이 위에 먹의 번짐 효과를 그대로 내셨습니다. 그래서 그런 의미에서 동서양을 가리지 않고 굉장히 인기 있는 작품 중에 하나이고요. 사실은 이 점 작업은 하나하나가 인간을 상징하는 겁니다. 그래서 많은 인간들의 어울림 또는 또 산울림 같이 퍼져가는 그거를 그리셨다고 합니다. 그래서 그런 의미에서 더 뜻깊은 작품입니다.
Yeah. So the last artist she mentioned is Kim Sunghee. I think many of you might be familiar with his name already because he had his last career living in New York, and he died in New York, and he was quite successful at the time. There are only 3 works in the donation, but he kind of places such an important place in Korean modern art history as one of the first abstract art painter. So, and all 3 works are quite large. And this is actually just a little, my personal anecdote. I really wanted to borrow this work, but can you see the dimensions? It is almost like 30 feet wide. So I was respectfully said no. I tried 3 times, and then I think that was a great decision, because what I was told is that because this painting is so large, whenever they have to transfer, they unframe, roll it, and then reframe, and then that creates a lot of stress to the work. So when they told me that, I just have to kind of step back. So I reserved you to this painting that she mentioned in great detail. So this is really one of his the career's last moments, the representative works, and then all these dots were really meant to express the human connections. And I was told this morning while we were touring with the director of the National Museum of Korea, he said every dot was made with the 6 different kind of brushworks. So can you imagine how many times he touched on this screen? And she mentioned it gracefully covers our the catalog, exhibition catalog. It was a very deliberate and very difficult decision, but I think we made a great choice. And as you can see from this detailed image, even though it's an oil painting, she mentions that it really creates that the ink wash the atmosphere, almost like the ink painting. And another thing that she also mentioned, but then she didn't mention it this time, is that the white lines that you see here is not the white pigments or white the paint. It is left negative space. What a poetic way to create this composition. I think that was really kind of a testament to the artist's very sincere and then his own very distinctive approach to this work, because in many ways, the East Asian paintings utilize a negative space in great deal. If you go to see the exhibition, Park Dae-sung's The Snow Scene in Bulguk Temple, the snow is expressed with a negative space. It is not painted white, but he painted other parts in ink so that the snow can be expressed with a void. So I think Kim Sunghee also kind of understands that East Asian aesthetics and ink painting tradition and applied into this. So I think we're quite running out of time. So I want to pause here and then give a little room for the questions from the audiences. And I'm sure there may be some interesting questions that I didn't ask. So I want to just open the floor for you. Is there any questions? I think our staff has microphones. Yes. So that if you can please wait until the microphone arrives, then we can.
Thank you, Kim, for coming all the way from Seoul, and thanks, Chee, for introducing, or thanks, Chee, for explaining the exhibit. Thank you, Tao, for introducing. I was just wondering, I had two questions. I was just wondering initially how much of this $23,000 total donation, or 23,000 object total donation, where or what time frame in history are most of those objects from?
So 여기까지 그 2,300점이 대부분 어떤 시대에서 오는지를 물어본 것 같아요. 23,000점이죠. 예, 그러니까 전체 그 도네이션 중에서. 예.
뭐 아시겠지만 23,000점 중에 저희가 1,448점입니다. 산수가 안 되는 데고 나머지가 이제 국립중앙박물관에 이제 유물에 속한 작품들은 중앙박물관에 기증이 됐고요. 1,448점은 근대 모던 앤 컨템포러리 아트웍은 이제 저희한테 기증이 됐습니다. 그리고 또 그 외에 또 뭐였죠?
So among the 23,000 objects, 1,488 objects were donated to the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art Korea, which constitute the works from the 20th century and then today. And it also includes Western works like Monet and then Picasso. So it's really a prestigious collection. And then rest of the objects all went to the National Museum of Korea. So those are mostly the pre-modern periods. If I just kind of give you a brief the snapshot of the collection, among those about 22,000 objects, 15,000 objects are books and calligraphy and then ink paintings. So you really kind of see the values that the family had, what was the most cherishing part, which really resonate to the deeply among the many Koreans, this kind of a reverence for learning and then emphasizing the value of education. I think that reflected in the collection deeply. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Yeah. That is very interesting. I also was kind of intrigued by the Chikado screen. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but I was wondering if any of the objects illustrated on those screens, any of those specific objects, if they were of real objects, then are any of those objects displayed in the exhibition today?
That's a little bit, I mean, your pronunciation was very good. I must say that first. I don't think I can say with a certainty any objects displayed outside the shelving units are depicted in the screen because there's been time periods the past. But also, I must say that that screen is almost like a idealized your wish list. Not everyone will have all those Chinese antiques and then beautiful the 문방구 or scholarly objects. It is some they probably have a few of them, but the rest of them are kind of their wishful thinking, so their desire to own those, and also their knowledge that, oh, I know of these things. I know Chinese antiques. I know these are the books imported from China. These are the books that made in the local soil. So there's a lot of kind of a knowledge or the inside knowledge is embedded in that the checkout screen. Yeah.
I think that's super interesting, and I'm sorry, I do have one more question.
Yes.
I told you guys two, but I have three. I heard that the very expensive and hard to find pigments, like the whites and the blues, were imported from other Asian countries. And court painters only had access to them. And I was just wondering, what time in history did those pigments really become commonly usable outside of the court painters?
I would say maybe, so for instance, cobalt blue was a great deal imported from the outside world. There was a constant effort to create domestic cobalt. But it was never successful until like late 18th century. So after that, blue and white ware became more widely available to the outside the court. So I would think that that was probably kind of a similar late 18th and 19th century also. From then on, the Korea was, although it was close, there was interactions through China, through Japan, and those pigments, the more readily available pigments like Prussian blues, and those things were also imported Korea. So I think maybe the late 19th century onwards, the pigments became a little more readily available. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Sorry to anybody else that wanted to ask a question.
No.
We have a question up here.
Yeah.
I'll make this quick.
Yes.
So Yeonsoo, thank you so much for this fantastic narration of the story of art access. In my mind, it is that. And I have a question for Director Kim Sunghee. And there's a lot of talk about ownership, repatriation, and dispossession of artworks. And regarding Korean artworks, like what is the extent? The current state of the artworks that's kept throughout the world in world institutions, and what is the position, especially for you, for those artifacts and artworks, whether you want it back or whether it should stay? I'd like to hear your thought on that.
그러니까 지금 한국 유물들이 해외에 많이 반출이 되었죠, 있나요? 그래서 그 반출된 유물이 어느 정도 되는지 혹시 알고 계시는지, 그리고 그 반출된 유물에 대한 관장님의 의견은 어떤지, 그 모든 반출된 유물들이 다시 한국으로 돌아와야 된다는 입장이신지, 아니면은 여기 외국에 남아서 그냥 전시가 되고 활용이 되는 게 괜찮다고 생각하고 입장이신지.
네, 아마 이게 이제 유물의 관계, 유물이 더 센시티브한 문제죠. 현대 미술 쪽보다는 유물에 관해서는 아마 우리가 지금 국립중앙박물관 관장님 이홍준 관장님도 와 계시긴 하는데요. 아마 다른 또 강의가 있으셔서 그러는데 국가적인 입장에서는 물론 약간 정부의 정책이 이제 조금씩 다르긴 하지만 국가 정책에서는 돌려받는 저희가 어떤 방식으로든 가져오는 게 정책의 메인 스트림이라고 생각합니다. 근데 실제적으로 이제 어떤 방식으로 택하느냐 해서 많은 국가 원수들이 외유 가서 그 나라 국가에 갔었을 때 저희도 아마 최근에 이재명 정부 들어서면서 최근에 중국 제가 정확히 기억을 못 하겠습니다만은 다시 유물을 돌려준 경우가 있습니다. 이제 그런 식으로도 정치적으로도 받을 수가 있고요. 또 많은 부분은 또 옥션에 또 많이 나오거든요. 옥션에 나왔을 때 국가가 그걸 사들이는 방식도 있습니다. 그리고 또 하나는 또 원수가 국가 방문을 했을 때 이게 정치적으로 또 협상을 해서 돌려받는 경우도 있습니다. 그래서 전 정부 시절에도 중요한 사리함을 보스턴 뮤지엄으로 제가 기억을 하는데 보스턴 뮤지엄에서 돌려받은 경우도 있습니다. 그래서 정책은 하나죠. 다시 국가 보물로 다시 찾는 게 정책이긴 하지만 방식에는 정부에 따라서 또 나라에 따라서 조금 틀린 것 같습니다. 네. 답변이 됐으리라 됐는지
Thank you.
모르겠습니다.
So she deferred the question about how many objects or cultural heritage are displaced outside Korea because of that kind of concerns the expertise of the National Museum of Korea rather than her museum, which kind of involves the modern and contemporary works. But then to answer your question about what's the position about repatriation. She believes that she is a government employee. The Korean government firmly believes that any national treasures, the objects with a great importance, should come back to Korea. But there should be many different ways to approach it. For instance, the few months ago when the Korean president visited China, the Chinese president gifted one object that was displaced in China. So there's that way. And also, there are a lot of Korean objects nowadays available readily in auction houses. Then Korean government should look at those objects and then identify those who are worthy to come back to Korea, not everything. And for thirdly, there's also diplomatic kind of negotiations. So when the presidents or the head of the state visits other countries, they can negotiate those terms, how they're going to come back. So last year, for instance, the MFA Boston, Museum of Fine Art Boston, finally agreed to the sarira. I don't think it was the outside, the container of the sarira, but then inside the relics were returned to the Korean Buddhist temples out of veneration and then respect of the objects. So, but as a government, Korean government, there's only one policy. The important objects ought to come back to Korea. I hope that answers your question.
We have time for one more question.
one
I
more
have one up
question.
here.
Thank you so much for the talk today. It was just fascinating. I have a very basic question. You mentioned earlier that the earlier painters used pigment, but they did not mix the pigments, and I was very curious as to why.
I think the mineral pigments in nature, it doesn't mix well. So those mineral pigments, either the lead or malachite or cinnabar. So I think there's a different properties. So in order to mix and then create the hues that they would like to desire, they probably didn't come to the kind of a result that they would have wanted. That's my guess, but I could be wrong. But instead of that, as I mentioned, they layered instead of mixing the pigments. So that was their kind of a way to kind of create the hues that they wanted to kind of yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, and I would like to just thank Director Kim one more time. Yeah.